I'm Margaret Lowe-Smith. I am president of the Atlantic's Live Events Division, and the Atlantic, I think as most of you know, is one of the proud presenters, along with the Aspen Institute, of the great Aspen Ideas Festival. Our topic this afternoon, flying cars, flying ideas, the future of mobility. It is a real pleasure to welcome Toyota's North American CEO, Jim Lentz. Toyota is one of our generous underwriters this year, and here to lead the conversation is Gwen Ifill. Gwen, I'm sure as all of you know, is the co-anchor and managing editor for the PBS NewsHour. She's also moderator and managing editor of Washington Week. Gwen, take it away.
Thank you, Margaret. And of course, you're looking at me and thinking, flying cars, really? Okay, Gwen, we're here, we're eating, we're willing to find out about it. But Jim Lentz did a couple of things for me today. He forced me to take a test drive in one of their crazy little cars, which I highly recommend, especially, and I'm here in one piece, so that's good.
It worked.
It worked. But really what we're here to talk about is a broader question. And it's a question which everybody in here who drives, everybody in here who has a vehicle can connect with. And anybody here who reads the headlines about what's happening in the auto industry and what's happened to and what will happen next with the auto industry can connect with. Basically, three general areas of conversation which we want to have. One is about safety. We all want ourselves, our children, our people driving fancy little smart cars to be safe, and we want to know how you do that. How do you adjust for that? Mobility. And mobility in the largest sense, not only how do we get around now, how do we connect to public transportation, how do we get from point A to point B for ourselves, and then what happens in the next generation of mobility, and whether it only has to do with vehicles and cars, which we'll tell you about. And then accessibility. And by accessibility, I mean not only who gets to drive those cars, where those cars get to go, where they end up, but also who can afford those cars, what's accessible to those kinds of vehicles. So, that's a lot, and we're going to talk for a while among ourselves, and then at some point, I'm hoping that you guys can take part in this conversation as well in the grand tradition of Aspen. So we're going to start by talking about safety. As you know, Jim, most of the reporting I've done about Toyota in the last several years has all been about lack of safety, not just Toyota, but a lot of big car companies who've been caught up in this massive auto defective airbag recall. So this is top of mind for a lot of people when they think about vehicles now. So I want you to address that first of all. Where are we with that, and where are we going with that?
Okay, in the case of the Takata recall, it's really unique to a lot of other recalls that have had. I mean, there are a number of reasons that vehicles get recalled. It can be a defective part. It can be the way a vehicle was manufactured. It can be a design issue. And in many, many cases, a defect will be known relatively soon in the process. There are many times that we know of a defect even before a vehicle ships from our plant, because we know there was a problem with a machine or with a batch of parts, and they're actually stopped before they even make it into the stream of commerce. But in the case of Takata, what makes it really interesting is this really hasn't manifested itself until almost 8, 9, 10, 12 years into use by customers. And what's making it really difficult to get to really what the root cause is, it happens in certain parts of the country. It happens on certain vehicles. It doesn't happen in other parts of the country. There are different types of accelerants used in these airbag explosives, which is what they really are. So it's been really, really difficult to get a handle on it. Each of the manufacturers is working diligently to understand what's happened within their realm. But what we found was most important was, because it's an industry-wide issue, there are 30-some million of these bags that have been recalled. But everyone has a different experience with it. Our idea was, let's get the industry together and share all the information that they have so we can pinpoint the cause of this much, much quicker. Because in the end, this is all about keeping customers safe and about getting these bags replaced as quickly and as conveniently for the customer as we can. So, we're all working at, all of us have had recalls. We now have a good supply of these replacement parts that we are working first and foremost in relative high humidity areas, because that's where it appears that this is taking place.
Okay, for full disclosure, I drive a Toyota vehicle, so this was a personal of interest to me.
Thank you very much.
I needed to know. But I want to move on to the fun part, which is the Jetsons. Remember the Jetsons? every time we watched that cartoon, we were excited about it because it told us about something we imagined we would never live to see, right? Cars going on their own, going here and there, flying, being able to have robots to do everything for you. Well, it turns out this is what the car industry, the auto industry, is now thinking about. So I want to talk about the Jetsons part of this, which is driverless cars, first of all. Now, I personally, not crazy about this idea. I'm a little too much of a control freak. Show of hands, who wants to have something else drive your car? Really? Okay, so
I told
you
you
were
this-
right.
I
Tell
told
me.
you this was going to happen.
Tell me about it.
So a lot of it has to do with what your definition of autonomous is and how quickly you think that this technology is going to make it into vehicles. So our view is maybe 15 years from now, we'll have truly autonomous cars where you will summon your car in the morning, you'll get in the car, you'll sit in the back seat and read your paper and you'll go to work. And while that's nice, to me, that's really not a real society. It doesn't solve a societal need. To me, it's all about safety of the vehicles. If we can develop, different types of sensors and find that we can make these sensors work in concert with each other in such a way that we can eliminate fatalities in cars, to me, that's what's most important about autonomous. In our case, we believe, especially in the short to mid-term, that these are really driver assist type vehicles. We believe that a driver is always going to be in control behind the wheel, but the use of cars that can automatically brake, that can see better at night, that can react faster, will be able to enhance the skills of the driver, hopefully avoiding accidents. And so to us, that's where we see the real sweet spot in these cars early on. Longer term, self-driving is okay, but there are a lot of issues that have to be solved before these can truly be driving themselves.
Okay, you say longer term. In the Atlantic Ideas issue, which I'm sure you can find on every doorstep here this week, there are questions which they ask at the very front of the edition, and there's a big question. And one was, in 100 years, will we be self-operating a 4,000-pound motor vehicle at 80 miles an hour, surrounded by other humans doing the same? Now, when you put it that way, it doesn't sound really like it makes a lot of sense, right? What's your answer to that question?
Well,
100
100 years now, sure.
No?
Sure. 100 years it'll happen. I mean, the reality is, if you believe this is going to happen in 15 years, so by 2025 or 2030, it will take another 20 years to get all of the older generation cars off the road. So you're really looking at that taking place probably around 2050, realistically, because there are a lot of issues to be answered. Not only the technological things, but some of the moral things. If you are sitting behind an autonomous car without a steering wheel, and you're driving down a road, and you're driving 35 miles an hour in an urban environment, and there's a car coming one direction, and an object steps in front of your car, what does the car do? Does the car hit that object? Does the car hit the upcoming car? I mean, assuming that it's not going to be able to stop.
And if the object is a human or a dog or a squirrel, does the car behave differently?
Right. So all of that has to get programmed in. If to avoid something it hits a sign versus a pole versus a tree, I mean, so all of that's going to have to be programmed into cars. And that's why we believe that a human needs to make that judgment over the short term until you have such a way that you can do that. Because eventually, at some point in time, this autonomous car will see that child playing behind a car before that child ever has a chance to come out in front of the car. Now, all of a sudden, it's easier to be able to make that decision because the car is going to sense there's danger ahead and possibly slow down so it'll be able to stop. But that technology has to catch up before you have a bunch of cars on the road that are 100% autonomous.
Okay, that's in 15, 20, 25 years. Let's talk about now. So
Okay.
I have a car that has lots of cool things on it, of which I use 1% of them, right? It can tell me whether I should change lanes. It can tell me all of these cool things. But part of me, even the things that I use, I feel like I am ceding my power and my skill to something else, and therefore I don't activate it. I'm a late adapter.
Well, what's as important is the ability to personalize. So even though we may have lane departure assist and automatic stopping and blind spot monitors, all of that. The driver should have the ability to decide what they want to do with it.
What is the problem we're fixing?
Safety. What we are trying to do is enhance skill levels of drivers, reaction time of drivers, so that we can zero fatalities on the road. And on the road, meaning pedestrians as well as other cars.
Are we improving the driving skills, or are we taking the need for skills away? So a teenager doesn't need to learn how to look in her rearview mirror or look to check the traffic, because the car will do it for him.
Yeah, you are probably not improving driving skills. Same thing happens on aircraft today. I mean, a lot of people will make the point that pilots today may not be as skilled as pilots of the past because they're not flying the cars as often. But I will also tell you that while there are autopilots on cars, I don't think there are autonomous aircraft. I have yet to see an aircraft where a pilot's not sitting behind the wheel and in charge. That's our view on autonomous cars, especially for the short term.
So if one of our big problems, especially with young people, is distracted driving, there, I've seen new models of vehicles that you can get Facebook on your nav screen. Seems like a bad idea. That's just me. So if you're distracted by that, by all these bells and whistles, at which point do you draw the line by not providing fewer bells and whistles?
Well, in our case, we have navigation systems in our cars, like just about everyone else does. But we lock those screens out while the car is moving.
Right.
And different manufacturers have different views. We are probably one of the more conservative views, where we want to eliminate as much distraction as possible. But part of the difficulty is you have to find a way that passengers in the car can still use devices. They can maybe, search on the internet, but you definitely don't want drivers doing that. So we have to find a way to be able to allow that to take place.
Let's talk about robots. Are they going to take over our lives completely?
I hope not. But I think, again...
But isn't this put us on that path?
Well, I think like autonomous cars, I think that they can help assist us. And they can help us and improve our lives through robotics.
Give us some examples.
I just happen to have...
He happens to have.
Just happen to be with me. So Toyota has been kind of looking at ourselves differently. We are one of the premier car manufacturers in the world. But probably starting about 6 or 7 years ago, we started to look at ourselves as a mobility company. So that way we embrace car sharing and Uber and other things. And we have a lot of brilliant engineers, some in the room with us today, that they engineer and design robots that actually build the cars for us. So we thought, why don't we use that expertise and try to do things for society to make life better for others? How can we use that to help make people more mobile? There's a program going on in Tampa, Florida right now, where we have health assist, human assist robots that are working with disabled veterans. Because the hope is someday that we'll be able to use robots in the healthcare industry. This one's even a little bit different. This is called a visual assist device. So this device actually has a couple cameras right here. There are a couple microphones. There's a place where I can plug in my smartphone. And this is for the visually impaired. So what this is going to allow them to do is we will actually be able to map locations. Shopping mall, as an example. We'll be able to map that shopping mall, and they will be able to navigate in that shopping mall, and the cameras will be able to see and identify things. They can see and identify maybe where the elevator is, where the restroom is. They can use face recognition and identify friends of the individual, maybe off of their Facebook. They'll be able to identify stores or restaurants. This thing will actually speak to the people through the microphones and the speakers, as well as vibrate ever so slightly as they become off path. So to us, that's truly about mobility.
Now make the connection between that kind of mobility and a vehicle. I mean, what is this? Why is a car manufacturer doing this?
Because we can.
Well, come on.
Because we have
there are a lot of things I can do.
Because we have the expertise to do it. Because if you look at what mobility is, it's really allowing people to have the independence and the freedom to do things. I mean, when someone of my age got their driver's license, that meant freedom. This will mean freedom to a lot of people that are visually impaired. Freedom of robots to help someone with a spinal cord injury will allow them to have freedom of mobility that today they don't. So why not do it?
Why not do it? It's a whole different idea, however, of you kind of have to adjust what you're marketing, don't you?
Mm-hmm. But it allows us, if you open your mind to mobility and not to manufacturing cars, then things like the iRoad that you drove, all of a sudden that becomes possible.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Oh,
so,
okay.
This morning I was wrapped. I was kidnapped basically, and taken to the test drive field over at the high school to drive one of these little iRoads.
It's actually on the screen.
Oh wow, there it is. That's. Look at that thing. It's got 3 wheels, and when you drive it, it's kind of like you kind of lean into it, or you feel like you're going to tip over. And I felt like I was going to tip over. In fact, what looks like a smile is actually a shriek of fear. And more than once, they edited this out. They removed the cones when I began approaching, so I could get the hang of it. It's actually, That's hilarious. I emerged in one piece, and as you can tell, I don't look unhappy, but it was I highly recommend it, but don't let your kids behind the wheel. It will be very, very bad. Let me tell you though, what is that supposed to do? What is that odd little vehicle supposed to do practically?
So this is about mobility as well. This is about stepping out of your comfort zone as being a car manufacturer. This is about looking for ways that you can help people travel that last mile. This is a way for people to embrace and encourage them to use public transportation. We're doing a test on these in Grenoble, France. There are about, I think, 35 of these, 35 of things that we call a COM. It's a small electric car. And they'll drive about 35 miles an hour. They've got a range of about 30 miles. So someone can go from their residence to public transportation, or from public transportation to their office, kind of that last mile piece. So this is really to find a way, how can we help kind of interconnect either private or shared ownership with public transportation in major metropolitan markets around the world to help reduce congestion in major cities.
Is there consumer demand for, whatever. The Toyota people are allowed to applaud now. Is there consumer demand for that, something that links essentially a private vehicle to public transportation? Especially in this country, public transportation is having trouble surviving on its own.
I think there is, but part of the challenge is, as a manufacturer, you have to build cars that satisfy today's customer needs. But you also have to kind of forecast what the needs in the future might be. I don't think we're getting a big outcry from consumers saying, we need to have you build this. But we know, based on density in cities around the world, that there has to be a way to tie these things together. Even if you look at a vehicle like the Prius or the Mirai fuel cell that's here, the development of that started back in 1992. No one was asking for a vehicle that had 2 motors in it, that was electric as well as gas. But our view was we were going to reach peak oil probably around 2025, and we had to find a way to squeeze.
Now explain to me what you mean by peak oil.
Okay, so peak oil is if you imagine 2 lines on a graph, and one is supply and one is demand. So peak oil is when the demand for oil exceeds supply and prices start to accelerate and likely never come back. I mean, today we see spikes and dips in oil prices, but when peak oil takes place, oil prices take off and they never come back. So at some point in time, it will happen. That's probably been prolonged because of technology and extracting oil out of the ground. But at some point in time, that takes place, and you've got to find a way to either be much more efficient with your gasoline-powered cars. That was the idea behind a hybrid and plug-in hybrids. But at some point, you're going to have to figure out what are you going to fuel these things with when gasoline doesn't exist, and that's where fuel cells came from.
Okay, before we get to the question of fuel cells or the solution, let's talk about the problem. I'm a child of Washington, where I can see all the reasons why things don't happen. When it comes to carbon footprints, that there are a million reasons, there are a million people who are interested in that not happening, who do not believe in the idea of peak oil, and who believe that the idea is finding more places to extract from. So is there also a policy battle that you have to wage before you can even get to this idea of fuel cells and alternative methods?
Well, I think that will take place, but I think we also need assistance from the government to help us transition people off of oil to other ways of doing things. We've seen it with electric vehicles where there are government subsidies on electrics. There are some subsidies today on fuel cells, but there are not federal subsidies. Those ended last December, I believe. So ideally, we would like to see that because it's going to be the future. I will stake my reputation that at some point in the future, this will become a hydrogen society.
Now, why not electric? We're already there, partly.
There are some challenges with the infrastructure on electric as well. But in the case of hydrogen, it's the most plentiful element there is. Today, it's primarily extracted from natural gas, but it can also be extracted from wind and solar and biogas. So it is a very environmental fuel source that is going to be more than just automobiles. It'll power our electric plants. It'll power these micro plants that we will see that either power neighborhoods or individual homes. I mean, we are betting that is the future of energy in America.
Okay, infrastructure aside, explain to the lay people in this audience, how does it work?
Basically, a fuel cell, in the case of a vehicle, is think of it as an electric vehicle that actually produces the electricity on board. So instead of having a battery, probably the size of this table, that might weigh 4 or 5 or 600 pounds, you have a traditional, very small battery. You have a tank of hydrogen. When you step on the accelerator pedal, it creates a chemical reaction between oxygen and hydrogen, and it produces electricity. That's what drives the car, and the exhaust is water vapor. So it is the holy grail of environmental cars for the future.
Which is what I drove on the way over to get to the Little I Road.
And how was that?
It was lovely. But as what happened when electric cars first started popping up, people said, well, where do you plug these things in? Where is the infrastructure that allows you to get these things going? And I know you're not the only company thinking about that.
Yeah, California is probably the leader. California, going back to the days of Arnold Schwarzenegger, they wanted to create a hydrogen highway in the state of California. They have set $200 million aside to seed this infrastructure. So these vehicles go on sale starting in California. Orders, I think, start in July. Deliveries will be in October. By the end of this year, so the year they go on sale, there will probably be around 20 stations in California. Next year, there are another 28 stations coming online, so roughly 50. And probably by the end of 17, they'll probably be in the neighborhood of 70 to 75. And I'm sure most of you are saying, well, that doesn't sound like much. I've got, gas stations on every corner.
Don't you like the way he beats me to my next question?
But the reality is, we worked with the University of California at Irvine. We said, how many fueling stations will it take to service 10,000 fuel cell vehicles on the road? And so the methodology they did was they took a look at, people that are buying battery electrics today, Teslas and Leafs. They took a look at hybrid sales and plug-in hybrid sales, and they kind of mapped out where those clusters are today. And then we told them it has to be convenient. So within about a 6 or an 8 minute drive time from where they live to where those stations are, how many stations do we need to satisfy the need of 10,000? And the number is 68. So we don't need 11,000 gas stations like we have today in California. So if we can get these 70 stations in place, based on our volumes, we're in good shape to satisfy those needs. The trick is going to be that we can't sell too much volume before we have stations, or customers are going to be upset. If we have too many stations before we have volume, they're not going to stay in business. So this is going to kind of be, really close working with the infrastructure to build volume and stations, step by step. to where we get this. East Coast is working on this as well.
Well, that was my next question. California, as we all know, is a strange state. They're ahead of the curve and behind the curve on so many things. But in this case, they would be ahead of the curve. They're clearly a target for you.
Yeah.
But if I live in say, Oklahoma, an oil-rich state, the entire livelihoods, generations are built on that support. I can imagine resistance to this.
There may be, but the good news is, as an example, in California, so we have a campus in California, in Torrance, California. We are surrounded by refineries. That's the bad news. The good news is hydrogen is used to make gasoline. So there literally is a pipeline that goes down the street right in front of our campus that is a hydrogen pipeline that services all these stations. So in our case, it's been tapped into, and Shell operates a hydrogen refueling station directly across the street. And on our campus, we actually have a hydrogen fuel cell that powers 40% of our campus off of that same hydrogen line. So in the case of places like Texas or Oklahoma,
Where your headquarters are going to be in Texas, aren't
we are
they?
going to be in Texas, but where there are refineries, hydrogen exists today. So the ability to put a hydrogen refueling station there will exist today. It can also be trucked in tanks. But the good news is, and I think we're announcing it, or announced it about half an hour ago, the range on these hydrogen vehicles are 312 miles. So it is much longer than any EV on the road today. So the reality is, you don't need that many stations to be able to fill those needs. Because I am sure in the state of Texas, we will have people that will want to buy these Mirai fuel cell vehicles in the very beginning. We just have to make sure that there are some stations for them.
Sometimes I wonder if technology gets ahead of public engagement, and to what degree do you factor that into your thinking, your planning? You can put a bunch of engineers in a room who will just go say, golly gee, we could do this. But then how do you know that you're not way, way ahead of the market?
Well, that's the trick. I mean, the reality is, to make this a business, I've got to satisfy the needs of today's consumers. Today's consumers are shifting their needs. They want trucks and they want SUVs. We supply those, we make profit off of that, and then we reinvest that in future technologies. So it's a balance. The Prius was the example. We invested, I think, $4 billion in Prius. We had no idea if there was going to be a market. Gas was $1 a gallon when we did that. So nobody was thinking about buying 2 engines in a car. Same thing with something like fuel cells. So to a degree, as a manufacturer or as a mobility provider, you have to provide customer needs today, but you've also kind of have to lead them into the future. Obviously, if you get too far into that future, it's going to be tougher to get people there. I mean, the shift away from gasoline to hydrogen is going to take decades, but it has to start somewhere. And with any change, there's going to be challenge, but we've never been a company to back off a challenge, so we're ready for it.
You say it's going to take decades and it's going to be a challenge. Is it also going to be, is the auto industry looking at this is our survival path as well, that we cannot sustain the kind of vehicles we have been producing all these decades and hope to still be in business?
I don't know if I can answer on behalf of the industry. I can answer on behalf of Toyota.
Go for it.
That we believe to be sustainable, hydrogen is going to be the future. And it may not be the future until 2050, but we've got to start that now to be able to get that infrastructure in place. And it's going to go well beyond just cars. It's going to be in homes. It's going to be in all kinds of energy. So we believe the time is right. And the U.S., California, is not the only believers. That same infrastructure is going in Germany, it's going in Japan, and it's going in other markets around the world.
How do you overcome, not only on this issue, but just in general about all kinds of innovation, how do you overcome anxiety and resistance to change? And I think about this in all kinds of areas in our lives, but certainly this is a perfect example since most everybody gets behind a wheel at some point.
Chardonnay. Lots of Chardonnay.
I go for the Sauvignon Blanc, but okay.
I think part of it is you have to continue to hold the vision. You have to keep your eyes on the horizon, because in business, and especially in the automobile business in the last 5 years, we have had more than our share of ups and downs. If all you do is focus on the downs and then back up, you're going to have a tough time. So you just have to keep on that vision of what the future is.
What would you say have been the biggest downs in the past decade or so?
For Toyota specifically, let's see, we had a recall crisis, we had the Lehman shock, we had a crisis of the yen, we had an earthquake and tsunami in Japan that we thought was going to put us out of the production business for a year. So, and all 4 of those things took place within about a 3-year period. So, but the good news about that is that feels like the new norm. So now this upheaval of change.
Disruption is the new norm.
Yeah, I mean, a market's going from 17 million to 10 million. That's never happened in the history before. Now we've figured out how to deal with that. You know, a yen that goes from, you know, a high of 75 to, you know, where it's kind of a normal at around 120 now. That's now the new norm. So you just have to have that Indiana Jones attitude and say, just bring it on. Let's go.
I want you to start thinking about your questions, but I have a few more of my own. This is all well and good, except I don't know that everybody feels like it's something they can have access to. So I want to talk about accessibility. Accessibility, starting with how much it costs to get into one of these vehicles.
It is a challenge. Today, the average price of a car is around $33,000. The average term of a loan is 67 months. Customers still keep cars 40-some months, maybe. So they don't keep them for the extended term. And 20% of loans today are in excess of 7 years. That's all customers' response to affordability. They're trying to buy as much car as they can, pushing the loan term out as much as they can. And today, when there are a lot of 0% interest or 2 or 3%, we can find our way through that. When we have more normalized interest rates, affordability will become more of an issue. But from a safety standpoint, we are going to offer these safety packages with automatic braking and a bunch of other safety features. Starting this year through 17, it eventually be standard on all of our cars. And today in luxury vehicles, there are $2,000 and $3,000 options. We're going to offer them between $300 and $500. Again, we want to seed that into the marketplace to try to accelerate the acceptance of that as quickly as possible.
So if I wanted to, if it were available and I could go buy the new hydrogen cell fuel car right now, what would that set me back?
If you purchase it, the MSRP is $57,000.
And the average cost of a car is $33,000.
Yep. But if you're in California, thanks to the taxpayers of California, there's a $5,000 rebate. We are hoping that the federal government reinstates the incentive as they have on electrics today, which is $7,500. But knowing that's going to be difficult for people, we also have a lease, 3 years at $499. That also will include free fuel up to $15,000 for 3 years. It will even allow you, whether you purchase or lease, the ability to exchange your car for 7 days a year to drive any of the other cars we have in our fleet. So you want to go on a trip somewhere, you don't think you're going to get hydrogen fuel, you can drive a Sienna or a Sequoia or something else. So we're going to do everything we possibly can to encourage this start into hydrogen.
And who are you marketing to when you do that?
It'll be interesting. You know, we have some experience from the launch of Prius. And early on, Prius were people that loved technology, they were engineers, and they loved environment. I think we're going to see that same type of owner on these first Mirais, because technologically it's a marvel. It is great for the environment. And I think it will be that same type of buyer. But the volumes we're talking about, the first 3 years, we're going to sell about 3,000 vehicles. So we can choose to go after these early adopters. It will be probably into the 2020s that we are selling tens of thousands per year. And by then, the cost is going to have to come down to be able to make it more affordable.
Jim, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Uh-oh.
What's the first car you drove?
My very first car was a 1964 Corvair.
Ooh, Corvair. I thought you were going Corvette.
Oh, no. Very sorry, with the hole about that big in the floorboard that missed it out. Yeah, no, it was...
Really? And when did you get interested in cars? After you finished fixing the Corvair?
Well, it never got fixed. Every time I stopped the car, I had to take the battery cable off because it was a short no one could ever find. In high school, I worked around cars. I had friends that worked on cars, and we took engines and transmissions out of 1958 Cadillacs. But I'm a little bit unique to most in the car business. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a design guy. I'm not a gearhead. But I love the business of cars. I love working with great dealers and looking at what society needs for the future and how we can make people's lives better through providing transportation. That's the car business I love.
The reason I ask you that is because I find that for many people, vehicles and cars, it's emotional. You feel a real connection to your vehicle. You are defined by, especially dudes, by the way. Very defined by the car you're driving. And so I wonder how much of that then factors into what you see for this future transformation that you can envision.
Oh, I think it's definitely a tie. And frankly, if we lose that emotional connection, cars will become appliances. And that is the worst possible scenario for manufacturer.
But I can see that happening here.
Well, it can if you let it get away from you. So if you can build in the rational side of automobiles, that they have the quality, the dependability, the reliability, and safety. I mean, that's the cost of poker today. But if you can build in that emotional side, the styling of cars, the fun to drive aspect, to me, that's 50% of getting there. The other 50% is to have great retail partners so that they have a great brand experience when they go to the dealership. And if you can do that, you'll be successful into the future in cars. It won't become a commodity. Some manufacturers will commoditize their products, and they are going to have a difficult job surviving if they do that.
You gonna tell us who?
No.
I couldn't resist it. We're now going to take a few questions from the audience here, and I already see some hands in the air, and we have a couple microphones. So why don't you come to this nice gentleman here, and then we'll work our way around the room. And I have the moderator's privilege of making you ask really smart, sharp questions and not give speeches. Okay, fine. Go ahead. No pressure.
What are the safety issues around hydrogen?
Hydrogen, if you look at what happens if things go wrong, is actually much safer than gasoline. Hydrogen is lighter than air. It tends to flare very quickly if it's ignited, as opposed to gasoline that is made to explode. That's what happens inside the cylinder of a car. So it's actually much safer. It's interesting, though, when you see a hydrogen station, the roof line of a station is shaped in a V. It's shaped like a V in case there's ever a release of hydrogen gas, that it just floats. Obviously, we've done a lot of testing on tanks. We have millions of miles. The tanks are actually made of Kevlar, and they are wrapped 40, 50, 60 times in Kevlar. So they've been well tested. They're about the size of a small scuba tank. So I believe people will feel that they're safe.
But if it was impacted,
It's safe.
The follow-up question was if there was impact, and he says it's safe.
Yeah, they will meet all the safety standards, and then some.
Yes, sir.
First, a comment. You drove a Corvair. I commend you for your comment that you're trying to lead or educate the customer. Ralph Nader, in the book Unsafe at Any Speed, criticized the automobile industry for just responding to what they thought the marketplace were. So at first, a comment.
Thank you. And he was right, by the way. Driving the Corvair, it was unsafe at any speed.
A question. How do we get more passengers down the road? I mean, with the driver assistance now and the ability to drive closer to the car in front of you,
Right.
there's a great opportunity to move more people down the road. And as we densify in and around our cities and in and around our communities, what's taking place other than, rail isn't really quite the answer we would like it to be. The answers revolve around rubber wheels. What are some of the answers?
No, you're right. I mean, that's part of the beauty of autonomous cars. It is part of the solution for highways today, because if you look at autonomous cars that could travel at 65 or 70 miles an hour, traveling at a safe distance where they're almost training behind each other. You can probably get 3 times the number of cars on the road as you can today. The big challenge is you've got to have all the cars that are out there with similar technologies. So it will be, 25, 30, 40 years before we're really going to be able to see that 100%. It may be that we see, today there are designated tollways. We may see in the future you have designated autonomous car roads so that people with autonomous cars can go in. It's
Okay.
actually,
Well, wait a second.
yes.
With our issues with infrastructure now, I'm trying to see where that's going to come from.
You take an existing toll road and you make it an autonomous car road. So the cars can train at a faster speed like you would have in a carpool lane today. Because the idea behind carpool is to allow people to move at faster speeds.
But if you're in a regular city street and the car next to you is not as smart as yours, how do you account for that? How do you take that into account during this 20, 30, 40-year transition?
It is going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
The same thing's going to take place as people have one smart car at home and one not so smart car at home. You are going to become accustomed to driving the smart car. It happens to me today with a blind spot monitor. I have a blind spot monitor in my car. I don't look over my shoulder anymore. It's a bad habit. I just look for my little light to flicker, and if it's not, I know I can turn signal and
I don't
and pull
completely
over.
trust it, but yeah.
But I jump in my wife's car and it's not.
Yeah.
And so I have to make sure I know what I'm in. That's going to happen during this transition.
Okay. Back here. Microphone is going to, oh, there you go.
You've talked a lot about selling cars, but there's a emerging and I think growing market of people who don't believe that owning a car gives you freedom anymore. And so we have car sharing, ride sharing, micro rentals, as well as a couple generations, boomers and millennials, who are moving into dense, walkable, experience-rich cities. So given that, how does that affect how you not only design vehicles but actually sell them?
Yeah, I think the ownership experience will change. I think if you look at multiple car households in the future, that number will shrink. There's no question about that. But I think people will consume cars differently. But what's interesting is even with Uber, we embrace Uber. The number one car driven by Uber drivers is a Toyota Prius. And that's by no mistake because we offer special incentives to Uber drivers to buy Toyota products. So, we're not trying to push away the idea of car sharing. It's a reality that we have to face and we have to deal with. As an example, I know when I was developing a brand of cars back 15 years ago, we went down to South America to understand how they used cars. And down in South America at the time, it's still probably the case today, cars were insured but not drivers. And it allowed 5 or 6 or 7 people to purchase a car and then share that car. So there are a lot of other changes that could take place, but look, we're not going to change the way consumers want to use their cars. We're going to have to adapt to it. We're going to have to embrace it, and we're going to have to work with it. And things like the iRoad that you piloted today, that's one way of looking at what the new urban environments are going to be, or these new rings that will form around these urban environments that aren't quite suburban, they're not quite urban. I mean, that's the new trend that we're going to see as well. And these vehicles that go, 30 miles in range and 35 miles an hour, but are really compact that you could fit 3 or 4 of them in an existing parking place. We think that's one of the solutions for the future.
I want to follow up on that because I guess I'm puzzled. What does Uber have to do with you? Why is car sharing any part of your business model?
Well, it's not necessarily part of the business model, but we have to work with it if it reduces the number of purchases that take place. So good news is until they start using flying carpets that I don't make, at least they're still buying cars, so I want to try to get as many of those as I can.
So you've made the bet that something like Uber is actually not just a flash in the pan.
Yeah, I don't think it's a flash in the pan.
Why not? Why wouldn't it be?
Because I think
I
younger...
mean, I think of Google Glass. That was hot.
But I think younger people... I've got a son that lives in San Francisco, and I hate to say as a car guy, he does not own a car. He had a car. It was too much of a pain in the butt to park. So he lives on Uber and Lyft and everything else. But at some point in time, his brother that lives in Nashville is moved out of his Prius and he's into a Highlander because they have a child. So his life stage needs change. As people move out of cities and into more suburban areas, and we're starting to see that transition take place today. As much as every young person wants to live in the city for the rest of their lives, things change. Affordability of housing becomes more difficult in an urban environment. Schools can become more challenging in urban environments. And we're starting to see that, but they are going to be the generation that creates this new ring around urban environments.
Used to her, and then to her.
This has been really interesting to me because I'm a car guy. I subscribe to 5 car magazines, and my wife here calls them my car porn.
And she's correct.
And she's probably right. But you were talking about hydrogen as the future. Some manufacturers believe in electric cars, battery-powered cars. Some have focused on hybrid vehicles. Some have focused on traditional hydrocarbons. Toyota is making a bet on hydrogen. Could you walk us through sort of the thought process of how Toyota got to hydrogen? And then secondly, how big a bet is it for your company, and what happens if you're wrong?
Well, actually, we believe in a portfolio approach. So today, we are putting our eggs in all of those baskets. If you look at our volumes today, about 13 to 15% of what we sell are hybrid vehicles. The industry's about 2.5%. So, we made the early bet. It's worked well for us. We're adding hybridization to more and more cars because we think over the short term, that's still going to be the play. The idea of putting extended range batteries into those hybrids is going to be the medium term play. And as an example, when I lived in Southern California, I drove a Prius for many, many years. And I lived 38 miles from the office, about 50 miles per gallon. Pretty good. When the plug-in came out, even though it's only a 10-mile range, I started driving that car, and I put about 26,000 miles on it. And my average fuel economy was 74 miles per gallon. So even as fuel prices go up, the combination of hybrids and plug-ins will take us some way down the road. We are also, in the next couple years, I think we have 15 new internal combustion gas engines coming out that will probably improve overall fuel economy by as much as 20%. So we're doing all those things, but hydrogen we still believe is a long term. So if I make a mistake, it's going to be only part of my portfolio that drops, and I will still have the ability on the other portfolios. And it may be 20 years from now, there's a fuel source none of us have thought about yet that may come into play. So you've got to always be innovating, always kind of looking at what that future might be. But we also believe in battery electrics. The difference is we don't believe in long-range battery electrics today based on battery technology. The batteries are too large, they're too heavy, they're too expensive, and it takes too long to charge them. When those problems can be solved, we may have longer range battery vehicles. But today, we believe batteries are more appropriate in vehicles like the iRoad, vehicles like the COM that are short 30-mile commutes that can be recharged in 3 hours just by plugging it into a regular wall socket. So, we just kind of have a different view of the value of battery today relative to other manufacturers.
So the answer to the question, what if you're wrong, is spread your bet.
Spread your bet. Spread your bet. I would not want to be someone that was 100% anywhere, especially batteries today.
I think this young lady had your hand. Yes? No? Didn't you have a question?
I did, but Jeff stole it.
Oh, okay, to the young man against the wall back here, and then we'll move forward again.
You may have answered my question already, but how efficient is hydrogen to gasoline, and how abundant is hydrogen compared to oil?
Hydrogen is almost an unlimited resource. So we're not going to run out of hydrogen anytime soon. In terms of efficiency, there is probably nothing more efficient than gasoline. That's why everybody uses gasoline today. But from a carbon standpoint, there's a problem. So if you look at pure electrics and you look at from what they call tank to wheel, which is basically from the battery to the wheel, battery electrics are the most efficient vehicle, especially from an emission standpoint. If you look at it, though, from the ground, from the well to the tank, hydrogen is the most effective. But if you look at it holistically, from where you're getting your energy from, so from the well, all the way transferring it to the wheel, battery electrics and hydrogen are about the same. So that's why we feel that given that battery electrics, you both have infrastructure to develop. The fact that you can refuel a hydrogen vehicle in 3 to 5 minutes versus having to have 6-8 hours to refuel a vehicle that may go 200-220 miles. We just think customers want something that's going to replace their gasoline cars, but that acts just like their gasoline cars. They don't want to create a new routine. They don't want to have to come home every night and plug things in and monitor on their cell phones what their charge is. They just want it to act like their car does today. And we think that hydrogen is the closest to that today. Batteries, someday, maybe, but today it's hydrogen.
There's someone hiding
Thanks.
behind the speaker over here. Yeah.
In your crystal ball, do you see drones possibly in the equation and other flying cars, and how fast might they go for individualized transportation?
Drones.
Hey, we've got one out here.
Yeah, right.
We're gonna
I'll go
hang you
fly
from the
it.
drone. Interesting question. I mean, that's kind of today about flying cars. It may be a possibility. I can tell you that we're not working on drones as of yet.
As of yet.
Well, but a number of years ago, we actually had an aviation division that we were working on aircraft.
Really?
Yeah. So it's not impossible to think about something like that. But it may be premature to think about that.
Meet George Jetson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. Wait for a microphone to find you. Here it comes.
So I need to ask the dude question. What will the dude car that presently looks to be red, made somewhere in Italy, has no air conditioning, no room in it, in your world of training, what will the dude car look like? Or am I going to be terminally depressed all afternoon?
I guess I opened the door to that, didn't I?
I knew you really wanted to ask it.
Well, I thought the fact that they put me in a pink car meant something, but...
Well, but that's what's interesting even about the conversation of autonomous, because a lot of people want to drive cars. A lot of people love the thrill and the excitement of cars. So I think the dude car is always going to exist. The dude car will always, it's just like F-150s. The number one selling vehicle in America is an F-150. I don't think an F-150 driver really cares about driving an autonomous vehicle. I mean, the fact that there could be a lot of safety
Or a hydrogen
involved.
car.
Well, they might want to drive a hydrogen truck. If I can put hydrogen fuel tanks in a pickup truck and stretch their mileage, they may not be against that.
Is that underway as well?
Not necessarily, but as long as you have the torque and the towing capabilities, as long as a truck stays a truck, I think they will be open to different fuel sources. But I don't think they're going to want to jump in the back of their super cab and have a ride to the office.
So there is no dude car in the works?
Well, there are always dude cars in the works. I mean,
Aren't there, though?
We're working with BMW on a potential dude car for the Toyota Channel.
Ooh. Yes, sir. I'm noticing a lot of questions from dudes, by the way, just saying.
Well, I'll change the tone a little.
Okay.
A lot of the dude questions were around product, and we spent a lot of time on product. 15 years ago, Lexus reinvented the customer experience. Sort of what's next for the customer experience in the future?
It's interesting. I have a couple great dealers sitting in the front, so I've got to be careful what I say. We believe in the franchise car system. because we believe that our expertise is in building the greatest cars, and our dealer franchisees do the greatest job in taking care of those customers. So that's why we have such a good partnership working together. But I think as you go into the future, especially if you look at millennials, it's interesting. Their number one resource is not necessarily money. Their number one resource is time. And today, in some cases, it may take 4 or 5 hours to purchase a car. You know, I may not like that, but I put up with it. I've got a 28 and a 31-year-old. They are not going to sit still for it. So we have to continually evolve our process to add value to those younger customers that will be 40% of our business in the next 5 years, to find ways to satisfy their needs and save time and process. That, to me, is the most important aspect going forward. But, you know, we have dealers that are investing a lot of money in people and process and facilities to be able to really provide a great customer experience. And again, as I said before, to me, when you look at what brands are all about, that's at least 50% of it. The other half is the cars. The cars are the easier part.
Speaking as a non-millennial, we could also use an improved vehicle buying experience.
I understand. But you and I put up with it.
Not really.
My kids
actually.
will not. Okay. Well, let me introduce you to this dealer. Carl will take care of you.
You don't really want me in your dealership. I'm trouble. Do we have another question? Yes, right back here.
Jimmy, you mentioned that Toyota wants to redefine itself as a mobility company than car company, but 99.9% of this conference was dedicated to cars, actually. What chances Toyota has to become really mobility company, especially with competitors like Apple, Google, who really are electronic-specific companies?
You know, part of that comes about with robotics. I mean, you're going to see a big push from us in robotics going into the future because that's one of our core competencies. You know, it's interesting when you look at Apple and Google. They are brilliant innovators. They are brilliant electronics companies. But it's very difficult to be in the business of making cars. I'm not sure if they know that yet because they're not building cars. So as much as, you know, I don't fear them. I see them as evolving the overall industry. We actually partner with Google and Apple in a lot of different ways. But I think once they find out just how difficult it is to build cars, we are probably one of the most regulated industries in the world. The lead times that we have to be able to design, engineer, test, even before you manufacture cars, it's a very daunting, you know, very high capital intensive business. Now, obviously, they've got a lot of money in the bank, but it takes a long, long time. And that's why you don't see very many newcomers into this business because it's so difficult to crack. So it'll be interesting. I mean, even Tesla, I think Tesla has done a great job. Tesla has the best battery. They have the best battery management system in the world. But being able to make money selling those cars has been a real challenge. And they're probably as good as any newcomer to the business. But you need scale in this business to survive. You know, Toyota, we manufacture 10 million vehicles a year. You need that because, you know, a new engine may cost $1 billion to design, or a transmission, or a new car. A total new car may be $5 or $6 billion in 4 years. And you may be wrong on what you design. So it's going to be very difficult for, you know, those outside of the automobile industry to really crack the manufacturing piece of that business.
I have a final question for you before we turn everyone loose to their other endeavors. I'm sorry, no more questions. Mike, because I get to ask the last one, which is, I asked you what your first car was. I want to ask you what you're driving now and whether it will exist in 10 years.
I'm driving a Lexus NX hybrid right now, So it's a smaller SUV. It's 30 some miles per gallon, and it definitely will exist. My hope is that it will exist in the future beyond just a hybrid vehicle, and that maybe someday it could become a fuel cell vehicle, or it could become a plug-in hybrid vehicle, because I think it's the perfect size SUV for today. Especially, I'm an empty nester. It's my wife and I, so it's the perfect size vehicle for us. But I love the utility of an SUV as opposed to going back into a passenger car. So,
And you look at your sons and think, that's the future. Don't we all? Jim Lentz, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.